Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Welcome back to part 2 of a 2-part series with Mr. Ron Genini. He is a retired teacher from Central Unified, actually Central High School.
That's right, from Central High. I started at Central High, and then it became Central Unified, and I was still at the high school. But
Welcome back to the program.
glad to be back.
Last week we were talking a little bit about World War I, and we ended the show where Turkey got involved with the war, sided with Germany, and then what happened?
Well, I got you through 1914. The war still goes on for 3 more years. In 1915, people had all thought it'd probably be over. They hoped by Christmas, ha. Well, 1915 comes, and you have some other major events. The U.S. had pledged neutrality. They didn't want to get into it.
So at this time that we're talking about, the U.S. says, you know what, this is not our problem.
No, it's not ours.
You all deal with it yourselves.
Right. And there was pretty much unity in the country on that feeling, pretty much.
Because it was far away too, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't
was.
like World War I was at our backyard.
No, it wasn't Canada or Mexico. It was across the ocean. And so the U.S. was neutral, but Germany was being squeezed by a British blockade. They were getting hungry. They wanted to break the blockade. And
So I'm going to stop you again.
Yeah.
I apologize. I don't mean
ahead.
to interrupt, but a blockade is occurring. Food in Germany is
it's getting
scarce.
scarcer.
So they're starting to be nervous.
They're not happy. And so if the people aren't happy, they're not going to support it. It comes to that. So Germany starts a program of unrestricted submarine warfare. They draw a line around the Allies, and they say we're going to blow up any ship that comes into this area we've marked. And so they do. And in May of 1915, a British ship of the Cunard Line, the Lusitania, was going to sail from New York to Britain. And the German embassy posted warnings in the New York newspaper saying, we're at war, and you're taking your chances. You're taking your chances. And so if I had seen that kind of warning, I would have said, okay.
I'm not going to do this.
I'm not doing it. But a number of people did. And the ship was fine until it got right next to the Irish coast. And of course, Ireland belonged to Britain, so it was enemy territory. Boom, torpedoed.
So the guts of Germany to blow up a U.S. ship?
No, an English ship.
English ship traveling from New York to back. Okay.
Yeah. And it sank this British ship. And they said it was carrying munitions, and it turns out it probably was, but still, it was a passenger ship, and quite a few Americans were on that. That caused a great deal of outrage here in the United States. You finally have some really first anger against Germany. Okay, that's one event. It's going to get worse, though. Italy, which had been an ally of Germany's for many years because they hated France for taking Tunisia from them. Besides, this is not our war. not with Germany, not with Austria. They don't like Austria. We're not with them.
We're out.
Well, we're out for a while, but if you want us in, what are you going to give us? And England and France and Russia say, well, we're going to give you a chunk of Austria. We're going to give you a big chunk of Turkey also. So come on. And they figured, the Italians figured, fine. And they declared war on Austria and eventually on Germany too, planning on getting all that stuff, which they didn't get after all.
It seems like, though, a majority of the countries were against Germany. It's just bizarre to know that a country like Germany, against all these powers, was still able to keep up the fight.
That's amazing.
There comes a time where
you can't.
You can't simply. you're fighting all around you, and now you're kind of instigating so that the U.S. is going to get involved.
That's right, and it's not going to be better. It's going to get worse. Good and worse. But still in 1915, the British decide to take Turkey out and capture Constantinople and invade they decide to invade at Gallipoli, at the Dardanelles. They decide to invade at Gallipoli. The Turkish army rushes there, and in a long holdout war, it was a long, for months, the British suffered terrible defeats. Most of their casualties were Australian and New Zealanders, the Anzacs, A-N-Z-A-C-S, the Anzacs. British commanders were not very bright. They really weren't. And they thought nothing of just sending men in to die, just go in and die, just go in, just like a hamburger factory, just pushing them in. And the British military was terrible that way, the way they sacrificed their men, but oh well, they did. Finally, they had to pull out. Finally, they pulled back. The Turks won that. And so about the same time is when they decide to take out the Armenians.
So let me stop you there.
About the same time.
Battle of Gallipoli, Turks have, the Ottoman Empire is victorious against the English.
In that one, yeah.
In that particular one. And then they say, okay, now let's look to our Christian minority, or what was the reason that
the Russians were probably helping, and the Armenians probably were getting help from Russia, yeah. The Turks suspected that because in the past, the Russians had helped the Armenians against the Turks, had protected them somewhat. The Turks figured the Armenians are a fifth column, in other words, a group inside the country which is attacking the country, working against the country.
But this was their own citizens, though.
I know that. It didn't matter. The Turkish Empire had a habit of slaughtering its Christian minorities, and probably some of the others too, but had a habit of doing that in the past. And so what they did, right about the time of Gallipoli, and it probably had nothing to do with Gallipoli probably, it was more looking at what happened with Russia, invading across the Caucasus. The Russians were invading Turkey, and were being rather successful at it too. The Turkish government, under what they called the three pashas, decided to eliminate the Armenians, and they did it in a typical way that, I guess you'd call them tyrants would do it. You get rid of the intellectuals. Number one, you get rid of them, people who do any thinking or leadership. Then you disarm people. You come take their guns away so they can't protect themselves, okay? And then what do? You sweep them up. And they did sweep them up. They did. They did that. They arrested or killed a lot of the intellectuals in Constantinople on one day. Then they disarmed the Armenians to the best of their ability, disarmed them, and put Armenian soldiers who were in the Turkish army, put them out, put them into labor battalions where they weren't armed also. And then you go after the people, and they'd remove the people. They removed them.
For simply being Christian and Armenian.
That's right. They give them a choice sometimes of turning Muslim, or in other cases, they didn't even bother with that. And they just took whatever they had, and they killed them, and they forced them on a long march, a lot of them to Syria, into the desert. Many, many, many died. The number generally agreed on in the world is about 1.5 million.
So this was the genocide.
That was this is really, truly the use of the word genocide, where you actually are trying to kill a people, wipe them out. What the Turks had done to the Bulgarians or the others, and what other peoples have done to other groups, minority groups, you might want to call it genocide, but it's not correct, because a genocide is really when you are trying to kill, eradicate
a whole population.
Eradicate it. Not just kill a bunch of them, but eradicate it. Erase them. just as you eradicate the ants in your house. You know,
Yeah.
is that anticide?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're getting rid of them, and that is just the way they did it. That was their plan. That wasn't, of course, the first one. We all know about what Hitler did to the Jews and others in World War II. The same sort of thing, truly a genocide.
And we'll talk about that. U.S. and World War I. When did we officially come in? I mean, you know.
On April the 6th, 1917, the Germans had sunk American ships also. President Wilson had warned them. He drew red lines, but he really meant them. He did. And he was tolerant, but then there came the point where couldn't do that anymore. At the same time, Mexico was in an upheaval, and there was a government there. Carranza had become the president of Mexico. Pancho Villa, to draw U.S. into Mexico and make it, not because he wanted the Americas, but because he wanted to make things hotter for Carranza. Pancho Villa attacked Columbus, New Mexico. General Pershing was sent after him. This is an old story, sent after him, never caught him. But the German government then offered Mexico a return of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if Germany and the U.S. went to war, if Mexico would declare war on the U.S. also.
But Germany would have to win.
That's right.
For them to offer
That's
that
right.
land.
That's right. That's right. And the British got a hold of this secret telegram that the Germans sent, the Zimmermann Note it was called, and they got a hold of it. That was stupid. It was left on a bus in New York. The German consul was carrying it in his briefcase, and he accidentally left it on the bus when he got off. It was found by a British spy, and it was turned over to the State Department. And when that hit the papers, especially if, you know, imagine hitting it in Texas, what the reaction was. With that sort of thing, the U.S. broke relations with Germany, and the Germans sunk another American ship. Remember, we're still neutral. Okay.
We're getting upset, but we haven't been.
We haven't stepped over the line yet.
Right.
I'm right at the line, but I haven't. If I go here, we're at war, but I'm just right here. Well,
we're getting closer.
Boom. So we declare war on Germany. And because of the American declaration of war, because of the American entry into the war, virtually assured an Allied victory. After the U.S. declared war, a number of Latin American countries, Brazil had been urging the U.S., do it, we'll follow you, we'll join. And Brazil did, but their contribution was patrolling the South Atlantic to keep that under patrol, to attack German vessels and what have you. Several Central American and countries and Caribbean countries declared war because they were under U.S. domination. They did that, but also for themselves to seize German properties, which they happily did. But when the U.S. entered the war, it saved, like I say, it saved the Allies for a simple reason. The Allies were collapsing. The Russian monarchy had been overthrown. The Tsar had fallen. And the Russians wanted out. They wanted out of the war. They wanted out. And the Russian army was deserting. It was crumbling. In France, there were mutinies where African colonial troops had to be brought in to force the soldiers back.
Can I stop you and ask what?
Go ahead.
What was the reason? I mean, it sounds like they were so strong.
Yeah, but they were losing it. The war, the Germans were hard. The Germans fought hard. And they, the Russian army was badly armed, badly led, badly everything. And the soldiers were being slaughtered, just like flies also, being slaughtered. The Russians wanted out. There was starvation in the country. The Tsar's government was collapsing itself. It pulled out. So that would have freed the German army to turn from fighting on the east also to concentrate on France. But the French army was collapsing in its own way. They didn't want to go back and fight. The French had to bring up their African colonial troops to attack. So right, they go back. In Italy, soldiers were, what they said in Vietnam, fragging. They were killing their officers, shooting them in the back and what have you. In Britain, if a soldier got away on a leave, he didn't want to go back. They were collapsing. Even in the German army, they were getting hungry. The German people were getting hungrier and hungrier, digging in garbage heaps to get potatoes and things. We've seen the photographs of that. And so this was fresh blood with the Americans in there. And in June, the first American troops, June of 1917, 2 months after war was declared, the first American troops arrived, and then it came a pouring of troops in. In 1918, by the fall of 1918, the Germans realized they'd have only one more chance. They had to make one big push at in the Ardennes forest, and it was the Americans who pushed them back. It was the Americans who did it, and that was the Germans' last big effort. When the Americans broke through and pushed them, the German army began to collapse also.
What amazes me about this whole thing is world history would have probably been much different had Germany not attacked the American vessels.
That's correct.
That were...
Or with American people on them, yeah.
With American people on them.
Yeah.
History would have been completely different had they
sure.
not made that. You know, it's like a game, and it's like they messed up there.
They messed up big time.
And it caused a chain reaction.
They messed up big time. They did. Boy, did they ever. And then, of course, President Wilson had his 14 points to make the world a better place, essentially. He called for the League of Nations, and he wanted end to secret treaties and end to persecution of minorities, wanted every people to have their own country. That would be a mistake, but that's what he wanted. He wanted these different things, and he promised the Germans a fair deal, a fair treatment, which he sincerely meant. But the Allies, our allies, were not in the mood for that at all. And he had his 14 points. The French premier, Georges Clemenceau, said, God himself gave us 10, and look how fast we broke them. This guy gives us 14. Well, Wilson, little by little, gave in on what he had proposed so he could get his League of Nations, and then the United States Senate refused to ratify the treaty because it didn't want the League, not the way Wilson wanted it. We would have joined the League, except not to be committed to sending troops to guarantee the peace anywhere else. You know, we want no more of this stuff. So anyway, there it is. The war ended at a cost, at such a cost. I just jotted some notes down, and then I'll let you talk since it's your show.
Well, it seems amazing that not too long after we had World War II, it's
That's
like we
right.
did not learn a lesson.
They didn't learn. They didn't
all
learn.
This bloodshed, all this money, all this killing, all this disaster, and we didn't learn anything.
No.
And we went back to World War II.
In the first war, 15 million people died. 9 million in combat, about 6 million of these were civilians who were killed, and there were about 22 million wounded. And as for the United States, the cost to the United States was $32 million of money then.
In that, and
That's
I want to
right.
stop you and say,
That's right.
$32 million. We're not talking today's money.
No.
Which
You can multiply it. You can multiply it by about 10 or 15 today. Multiply it by about 15, and you'll get the figure. You'll get the figure. Just try to compare with what I remember seeing of prices in those days to now. But now with World War II, a bigger one, just 20 years later, the United States would lose 296,000 people. Over the world as a whole would have lost 40 million. 40 million people died in World War II. And the cost just to the United States in 1940 dollars was 288 billion, but in today's money, 5 trillion. So you ask why we go right into another war? Simple. Not that simple, but simple enough. The treaty that the Allies imposed on Germany, the Versailles Treaty, was really just too hard. Yeah, Germany deserved to be punished for what they had done in eastern France and what have you, but it was just too harsh, and imposed huge reparations, which they couldn't pay. Huge reparations. And I'm skipping over a lot of stuff here.
Yeah.
You understand, a lot of stuff. But when Hitler came to power in 1932 and 33, when he came to power, they stopped paying the reparations. Basically told the Allies to go to hell. They weren't going to pay any more. They were not going to pay any more. What are you going to do about it? Well, they didn't know what they were going to do about it.
And we're running out of time this week on the program, but who were the sides? Were the sides the same again? I mean, was it like
Almost.
it like a battle? And I mean, was it like one of these things where, okay, we lost the first round, we're coming back at you at the second round?
Well, 20 years, yeah. In fact, some thinking people, Marshal Foch, who had been the commander of the Allied forces in the First War, said, this isn't a peace treaty, it's an armistice for 20 years. How he knew 20 years, but there. Because in 1939, that war started. 1918, the first one ended. 1939, the second one starts. Were the sides the same? Basically, but with some changes. Italy and Japan had been with the Allies in the First World War. They were now allied with Hitler. They switched, they were on the other side. On the other side, France, Britain, the United States, Russia, yes, the Soviet Union. On the Allied side, Stalin had been an ally of Hitler's to begin with, and so he could get Eastern Poland, get the Baltic states and what have you. But Hitler turned on Stalin, and we know what happened. When he turned on him, you have this two-front war again, this problem. He didn't think it would happen, but it happened. There's a lot to tell there too. But the cost of this, ungodly when you look at between both of them. And is it worse? Is it still a danger of war? We're in a world war. I think we are. It's not a declared war per se, because you don't have a nation to declare it on. But this threat from ISIS and from Al-Qaeda, these others, this terrorist attack on the rest of the world. As far as I'm concerned, this is a world war. And in a way, it is a lot more dangerous, because the First World War was not so concentrated against civilians. The Second World War was concentrated against civilians to demoralize them, and in demoralizing them, their countries would fall, okay? But this one here is mostly an attack on civilians. That's why it's terrorism. Now, some are going to argue with me on this, and fine. They can feel as they feel. I have my opinion about this, but there. The First World War also created a lot of the problems we have from this. It was over almost 100 years ago, but it created these problems. The way it divided the Turkish Empire, for example, the way it created these nations like Syria and Palestine and Lebanon. Well, Lebanon was created after the fact. Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, they were all created by the Allies. They were all created by the Allies. And not to offend anyone, but I'm just quoting an Egyptian diplomat from about 10 years ago or so. He said, the only real countries in the Middle East are Turkey, Egypt, and Iran. The rest of them are nothing but tribes with flags.
Interesting.
And that was his opinion. And when you look at the history of it, I can't argue with it. I don't know who could. No.
Interesting.
And it came from the war because because of the way they divided things up. The way they divided things up. And we're living with it today.
But you think that, could this get worse? I mean, could it get worse?
If I knew the answer to that, I'd be on Wall Street. I hope it doesn't. Naturally enough, I hope it doesn't. But could it? if it's allowed to grow, yes, it could get worse. It's like a cancer. And in the other world wars, there were definite ends. Maybe not long-lasting ends, like in 1918, but there were ends. And you knew who won, you knew who lost, and you knew how and why. In this particular case, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, we're running out of time. We've got about a minute and a half or so, but all the stuff you've covered in the last 2 segments of San Joaquin Spotlight, why should we care about it? It's history. Who cares?
Well, so people like me could keep being paid. But seriously, why should we care? Because if we don't care, it's going to happen again and again and again. And we're part of this world. If it happens again, it happens to us, it happens to our families, it happens to our property, it happens to our neighbors, it happens to everything around us. Well, that's why we should care. We should care about why we're here, what we can do to make it somewhat better or avoid these pitfalls again. To avoid the pitfalls, what scares me is when I see our government or others doing the same things they did 100 years ago, falling into the same pattern. Different personality, but by God, it's the same pattern.
Mr. Genini, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Well, thank you for asking me.
Telling us the story of World War I and a little bit of World War II, but we are going to invite you back to talk more about World War II because I know you skimmed over it, and there's a lot more to talk about there.
There's a lot more to talk about, yeah.
That's all for this.
I have family in it. So, okay.
So yeah, and there's so much more there that we can talk about. Mm-hmm. In a few months, we'll have you back.
Very good.
That's all for this edition of San Joaquin Spotlight. To the volunteer crew who's in the studio doing this program, thank you. We couldn't do it without you. Their names appear at the end of the broadcast. Thank you to Mr. Genini, our guest this week.
Again, thank you.
Thank you to our audience members listening to the audio version of this program on 90.7 KFSR Fresno. We couldn't do it without you. And to our audience members watching this broadcast on CMAC, Comcast 93, AT&T 99. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Tune in next week to a new edition.